Man in MAGA hat is rejected for a bank loan by the manager, not realizing he's undercover owner. Marcus pushed open the heavy glass doors of the Riverview Bank's downtown branch on a warm morning. His appearance was simple: worn jeans, a loose shirt, and a red MAGA baseball cap that looked a bit faded. He wanted to see how people treated him when they assumed he was just an ordinary customer. In truth, he was far from ordinary. He was the bank's true owner, here undercover to test how well his staff served all members of the community. The bank lobby was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioning and the faint clicking of computer keys. 3 people waited on plush chairs along the wall, glancing at their phones. Posters promised "We support local businesses" and "Community first," words that Marcus hoped rang true in practice, not just on paper. Behind the main counter stood 2 employees. One was an older woman with neatly styled salt and pepper hair and a sharp suit. Her name tag read Caroline White, branch manager. Next to her, a younger man named Daniel arranged brochures, his posture a bit tense. Marcus noticed Daniel's kind face and the way he carefully stacked the papers, as if even small tasks mattered to him. Marcus walked up and cleared his throat softly. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm. "I'd like some information on a small business loan. I run a tiny woodworking operation and want to expand." Caroline glanced up, her eyes settling on his hat almost instantly. Her polite smile was thin and measured. "Certainly, sir," she said, gesturing toward a small desk off to the side. "Please have a seat." Marcus followed her, sitting down opposite Caroline. The desk was tidy, lined with folders and brochures showing happy families and smiling business owners. He hoped he would be treated as fairly as those smiling faces suggested. "So what kind of expansion are we talking about?" Caroline asked. Her tone stayed formal, but there was something cautious behind it, as if she already decided he wasn't the right fit. Marcus explained simply, "I build custom furniture, tables, chairs, that sort of thing. I've got regular customers, but I need better tools to grow. I was hoping the bank could give me a loan." Caroline nodded slowly, but her eyes kept drifting to his cap. She tapped a pen against her folder. "We have standards for all our loans," she said. "We need strong credit, proven income, and a good growth plan." She spoke as if expecting him to fail these criteria. Marcus calmly handed her a sheet with basic financial details. He didn't share everything. He wanted to see if she would at least try to help. Instead, Caroline frowned as she read it, not trying to find a solution, only problems. "I'm not seeing much collateral here," she remarked, "and your figures seem quite modest." "I'm just getting started," Marcus said. "That's why I need a loan, to lift things off the ground." Caroline's smile tightened. "I understand, but we must ensure profitability. Perhaps you could try another lender or ask family members. This may not be the best fit." At the counter, Daniel glanced over, looking concerned. He seemed curious, maybe even uneasy with how this was going. He stepped forward, holding a small tablet. "Ms. White," he said softly, "didn't we introduce a new program last quarter to help small local artisans? We had those flyers." He trailed off, hoping his manager would recall. Caroline shot him a sharp look. "Daniel, I'm aware of our offerings," she said, voice crisp. "In this case, the application doesn't match the profile." Daniel looked like he wanted to say more, but held back. He nodded, stepping aside while adjusting his glasses. He seemed disappointed, as if he truly wanted to help Marcus find a path forward. Marcus sighed and stood up. He felt a quiet sting of anger and sadness. The bank's slogans promised support, but its manager seemed unwilling to even try. "All right," he said, forcing a polite smile. "Thank you for your time." He began to head toward the exit. As he passed the waiting area, one of the customers raised her eyebrows, having overheard parts of the conversation. The posters on the wall gleamed, making their promises sound hollow. Meanwhile, Caroline returned to her files, satisfied that she'd done her job. But then came a soft voice. "Excuse me, sir," Daniel called, hurrying after Marcus just before he left. "I'm sorry about that. If you'd like, I can show you some resources. Maybe we can find a solution or book another appointment with a specialist who deals directly with artisans." Marcus turned, surprised by the young teller's kindness. He saw sincerity in Daniel's eyes, a quiet determination to help. This was the spark he'd been hoping to find, someone who cared, despite appearances. "Thank you," Marcus said softly, nodding. "I'd appreciate that." No one knew the truth yet, that the man in the MAGA hat was actually their employer. But as Marcus followed Daniel to a quieter corner, he realized that this bank was not hopeless. There was still at least one person who believed in the very values they advertised, and this unexpected ally would soon play a part in changing everything. Daniel led Marcus toward a small seating area near the side of the lobby, away from prying ears. The chairs here were simpler, the lighting softer. Marcus noticed how Daniel took a quick glance back at Caroline, who was now discussing something with another staff member, likely ensuring that Marcus's request wouldn't leave any lasting trace. Clearing his throat, Daniel spoke quietly. "I'm not a loan officer, so my authority is limited, but I know our bank's policies pretty well." He fiddled with a pamphlet in his hand. "We introduce programs for local craftsmen and tradespeople. They're not advertised heavily, but they do exist." He looked down, a bit unsure. "I'm sorry Ms. White was so quick to dismiss you." Marcus smiled gently. It was strange, standing here in disguise and appreciating the honesty of an employee who worked for him without knowing it. He nodded. "Don't worry. I'm grateful you took the time. I just want to know if there's a fair process. I've got plenty of ideas, and I'm certain I can repay what I borrow." Daniel's eyes brightened. "I believe you. I've seen applications come through that are less solid than what you showed. At the very least, we could have explored the options." He lowered his voice as if sharing a secret. "Honestly, Ms. White's been a bit selective about who she tries to help. I've seen it before. Older couples, people in less professional clothing, even a young man who came in last week wearing a sports team jacket. She seemed uninterested. It's not official policy, but she turns people away quickly if they don't meet her personal standards." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Personal standards?" Daniel nodded. "I hate to say it, but it's like she wants only a certain type of clientele. People who look successful, talk with confidence, or have big names behind them. The rest are seen as risks." He sighed. "I got this job because I believe the bank's mission. You know, all that community first stuff. I still want to believe in it." Marcus felt a wave of quiet satisfaction mixed with sadness. He was glad Daniel still cared about the mission. It hurt, though, to see his own manager failing to uphold the values he tried to instill. "Is there anyone else here who might give me a fair shake?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. Daniel considered the question. "We have a regional loan officer who sometimes visits, or there's an assistant manager, Mr. Patel, who might be more open-minded. He's on vacation now, but he'll be back soon. If you could wait a week, I could try to get you an appointment with him. He's fair and thorough." Marcus nodded slowly. "I might take you up on that." He paused, looking Daniel directly in the eye. "But why are you helping me? I'm just a stranger who walked in off the street." Daniel's cheeks reddened slightly. "I guess because it's the right thing to do. I mean, what's the point of this job if we're not helping people improve their lives? Your request sounded genuine, and I saw how Ms. White treated you. It bothered me," he shrugged. "My parents own a small bakery. They had to fight for every loan, every boost. They were overlooked a lot. I guess I know what it's like for people who don't fit a neat picture." For a moment, Marcus was quiet, absorbing that. Then he reached out and patted Daniel's shoulder. "I appreciate your honesty. Let's say I'm willing to wait. Maybe we can put something on the calendar with Mr. Patel. Just knowing there's another option gives me hope." Daniel smiled, relieved. "Sure, I'll mark it down. Give me your contact info and I'll keep you updated." He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it over. "Call me if you have any questions before then." Marcus took the card, glancing at it. A small spark of pride lit inside him. He had found someone who still believed in fairness. He carefully slipped the card into his pocket. "You've done a lot already, more than your manager." Just then, Caroline's voice drifted across the lobby. She was addressing another customer, her tone bright and charming. The contrast was glaring. She could be pleasant when she wanted to be. Marcus tilted his head. "Does she ever get checked on? I mean, does the head office look into how these branches are run?" Daniel lowered his voice further. "Occasionally. But she's good at putting on a show when higher-ups visit. And her numbers look good. She meets profit targets. I don't think anyone suspects how selectively she's treating clients." Marcus pursed his lips. He knew exactly how well the branch had been doing. He'd seen the reports. Yet there had been a nagging feeling that something was off, prompting this undercover visit. Now he had confirmation from someone on the inside. Caroline was shaping the client base to her liking, ignoring the bank's stated mission. That needed to change. "I see," Marcus said quietly. He couldn't reveal his true identity yet. He wanted to understand more, to give Caroline and others a fair chance to prove themselves. But this conversation with Daniel confirmed what he feared. The bank's message wasn't reaching everyone, at least not through this branch manager. Daniel stood up, straightening his vest. I should get back before Ms. White wonders what I'm doing. But I'm glad I could help, at least a little." He smiled again, more confidently this time. "Don't lose hope." Marcus rose as well. "I won't. You've given me reason not to." He paused, deciding to plant a seed. "Daniel, if you ever get the chance to present ideas to upper management, if you could fix one thing here, what would it be?" Daniel looked thoughtful. "I'd put real checks in place, so we don't just judge customers by appearances. More transparency, maybe a secret shopper approach." He laughed softly, unaware of how on the mark he was. "We need to be sure every customer gets a fair hearing." Marcus nodded, tucking that sentiment away for later. "I like the sound of that." With a final nod of thanks, he turned and walked out of the bank. He knew he'd be back, maybe sooner than Daniel expected. And when he returned, he would not be leaving as just another customer with a MAGA hat. This story was far from over. Marcus stepped out into the sunlight, the warmth on his face doing little to calm the swirl of feelings inside him. He moved away from the bank's entrance, pausing under a small tree along the sidewalk. Just moments ago, he'd been treated like a nobody, someone not worth the effort. Caroline had dismissed him without hesitation. Yet Daniel's kindness reminded him that hope still flickered inside these walls. He wondered how to proceed. The plan wasn't just to show up and reveal his identity. That would be too easy, too sudden. He wanted to understand the branch's culture more deeply, to see if this problem ran wider than one manager's attitude. Caroline was an issue, but was she acting alone or reflecting an unspoken standard? Marcus decided he'd come back in a few days, maybe in a slightly different disguise, to observe more interactions. Meanwhile, he'd make some discreet calls from behind the scenes. A quick walk brought him to his car, an older model sedan he'd borrowed for this undercover trip. Slipping into the driver's seat, he pulled out his phone. The number he dialed rang twice before a calm voice answered. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hale." "Afternoon," Marcus said, addressing his personal assistant who was stationed at the corporate office. "I just left the downtown branch. I need some information." He kept his voice low, scanning the sidewalk to ensure no one overheard. "Pull the performance reports for Caroline White over the last 2 years. I want to see the breakdown of the clientele and any patterns in the loan approvals." There was a slight pause on the other end. "Certainly, sir. Anything else?" "Check when Mr. Patel is scheduled to return. Also see if we can discreetly arrange a follow-up inspection of the branch, preferably one that doesn't tip off Caroline. Maybe have someone from our compliance team visit under a routine pretense." "Understood, Mr. Hale," the assistant replied. "I'll get back to you shortly." After ending the call, Marcus sat quietly for a moment, thinking about Daniel's suggestion that secret shoppers might help ensure fairness. Ironically, that was exactly what he'd been doing today. He shook his head, smiling softly. Daniel was on the right track, and he had no idea just how close he was to influencing real change. 2 days later, Marcus returned to the bank disguised differently this time. He wore no hat, just a neutral button-down shirt and slacks, something neat but not flashy. Instead of going straight to Caroline, he waited in line as a regular customer, observing the staff at work. He noticed Caroline glancing at him once, not recognizing him from before. Without the hat and the casual attire, he looked like another ordinary middle-class professional. The shift in her demeanor was striking. She was more cordial now, greeting people with a broader smile. Daniel was busy helping a couple who seemed uncertain about their mortgage options. Marcus watched as Daniel explained everything patiently, pointing out details on the brochure, making sure they understood. The couple looked relieved by the time they left, thanking Daniel warmly. It pleased Marcus to see Daniel's consistency. He showed genuine care regardless of who stood before him. After a few minutes, Caroline approached Marcus herself. "Hello," she said brightly. "How can we help you today?" No forced politeness, no suspicious tone. She looked at his neat clothes and seemed more open. It was like dealing with a different person. Marcus cleared his throat. "I'm considering moving my savings account here," he said calmly, "and possibly looking into some investment options." He wanted to see how she handled someone who appeared more like her ideal customer. Caroline's face lit up. "Wonderful," she exclaimed. "Riverview Bank offers a range of options, from basic savings to managed investments." She led him over to a desk, offering coffee and talking about interest rates and special offers. Marcus nodded along, feeling both impressed and disappointed. She clearly had the skill to provide excellent service, but it was only triggered when she approved of a customer's appearance and perceived worth. Just then, Daniel passed by, recognizing Marcus's voice. He halted for a fraction of a second, eyes narrowing with curiosity. Marcus gave him a quick, subtle nod, hoping Daniel wouldn't say anything. Daniel, ever discreet, merely smiled politely and continued on his way. The younger employee's face showed a flash of confusion. He must have recognized Marcus from their first meeting, but wasn't sure what to make of this new scenario. When Caroline excused herself to fetch some documents, Marcus took the chance to whisper to Daniel, who lingered nearby, sorting paperwork. "It's me," Marcus said softly. "I'm back, checking a few things." Daniel blinked, surprised. "You look different," he whispered. You got an appointment with Mr. Patel yet?" he asked hopefully, remembering their conversation. "Working on it," Marcus replied, keeping his voice low. "But I needed to see how things run on a typical day." He glanced at Caroline's desk, where she placed a glossy brochure advertising equal opportunity lending. The irony was thick. Daniel nodded slowly. "I'm glad you came back," he said. "Just be careful. Ms. White, she can be sharp. If she suspects something's off, she'll change her tune quickly." Marcus appreciated the warning. He patted Daniel's arm lightly. "Don't worry. I'm prepared." Caroline returned, none the wiser. She resumed her cheerful pitch, offering Marcus favorable terms for new account holders, terms she hadn't mentioned at all when he wore the MAGA hat and casual clothes. It confirmed what he suspected. Her standards were flexible, bending to her biases. After completing this short visit, Marcus left the bank with new insights. He now had direct evidence that Caroline's attitude varied drastically depending on her assessment of customers. He had seen Daniel's integrity remain steady, no matter who approached. Soon Mr. Patel would return, and Marcus intended to use that opportunity to set things right. The pieces were coming together. Marcus walked away determined. The showdown was coming, and this time he wouldn't be leaving the branch as a stranger. When he returned, he'd bring the full weight of his authority, and he knew exactly who he wanted on his side. It was a bright Monday morning when Marcus returned to the Riverview Bank downtown branch for the third time. This time, he didn't bother with a disguise. He wore a tailored suit, crisp shirt, and a simple tie. Gone was the old baseball cap. He arrived early, just before opening hours, accompanied by 2 senior members of the corporate compliance team. They waited near a coffee shop across the street until they saw the lights turn on inside the bank. Once the staff had settled, Marcus nodded to his colleagues and strode confidently across the street. Inside, the bank was quiet, just opening for the day. Caroline stood near the front desk, flipping through some papers. Daniel was at the teller counter, counting the cash drawer with meticulous care. A few moments later, 2 other employees arrived, and the hum of starting another workday began. Marcus entered through the glass doors without hesitation. This time, every step he took was filled with purpose. Caroline looked up, saw the well-dressed man and the 2 officials behind him, and immediately put on a warm smile. "Good morning, sir. How can we help you today?" she asked brightly, not recognizing him as the scruffy man she'd dismissed before. Marcus offered a polite nod. "Good morning, Ms. White. I'm here to see Mr. Patel. I believe he's returned from his vacation?" His voice was calm, professional. He knew Mr. Patel, the assistant manager, had arrived at the branch an hour earlier, as arranged with his assistant at headquarters. Caroline blinked, surprised that he knew Mr. Patel by name. "Yes, of course. Let me fetch him," she said, a hint of curiosity in her voice. She walked briskly toward the offices in the back. From the corner of his eye, Marcus caught sight of Daniel. The young teller stared for a moment, recognition dawning. Marcus gave him a quick smile and a subtle nod. Daniel's eyes went wide. He understood now that the customer who'd worn the MAGA hat and the customer in the neat button-down shirt was the same person standing here now in a suit. There was something authoritative in Marcus's bearing that hinted at what was coming. Soon Mr. Patel stepped forward, extending a hand. "Marcus Hale, it's a pleasure to see you again, sir." Patel's tone was respectful. He knew exactly who Marcus was, the owner of the bank, a man rarely seen at the branch level. His presence here was no accident. At these words, Caroline's friendly demeanor froze. She glanced back at Marcus, confusion shaping her features. "Mr. Hale, as in?" "Yes, Ms. White," Marcus said gently but firmly. Marcus Hale, the owner and CEO of Riverview Bank. He didn't give her time to speak. Instead, he gestured to the 2 officials who'd entered with him. "These are members of our compliance and ethics team. We're conducting a review today." His voice carried a calm authority that made the other employees straighten their postures. Caroline's cheeks flushed and she stammered, "I had no idea you were coming. If I'd known," her eyes darted nervously around the room. She looked at Marcus's face, trying to recall if she'd seen him before. There was something familiar about his eyes, about the way he stood. Slowly, realization crept in. She swallowed hard. Marcus offered no immediate explanation for his previous visits. Instead, he turned to Daniel, who was now watching intently. "Daniel," Marcus said, "would you mind joining us in the conference room? We'd like your input on a few matters." His tone was kind, and Daniel nodded, still stunned, and followed them. In the small conference room, the compliance officer sat near the door, prepared to take notes. Caroline hovered by the side, worried lines etched on her forehead. Patel sat quietly, arms folded, curious to see how this would play out. Daniel took a seat, his posture straight and respectful, but his eyes still held that hint of disbelief. Marcus began, "Over the past week, I visited this branch a few times. On my first visit, I looked very different." He paused, letting his words hang. Caroline's face grew pale. "I wore a MAGA hat and casual clothes. I asked about a small business loan for my woodworking endeavor. You, Ms. White, dismissed me without much consideration. Yet, on another visit, when I dressed more professionally, you were eager to help me open accounts and discuss investments." Caroline opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She had no defense prepared. Marcus continued, his voice steady and calm. "This isn't about politics or appearance. It's about fairness, professionalism, and living up to the mission statements we proudly display. I learned a lot from these visits. I saw how one employee," he gestured toward Daniel, "did his best to assist customers no matter how they looked. Daniel tried to bring up programs that would have supported small artisans. He put in effort when it wasn't expected. He lived the values of our bank." Daniel blushed, lowering his gaze, but a small proud smile tugged at his lips. He had never imagined this outcome, never dreamed the ordinary customer he tried to help was actually the owner. Marcus shifted his attention back to Caroline. "Ms. White, I'm deeply disappointed. Your behavior doesn't align with our bank's principles. We do not judge customers by their attire, their political affiliations, or their perceived income level. Our goal is to support our community. Every customer deserves a fair chance." Caroline's voice came out shaky. "I am sorry, Mr. Hale. I should have followed through, asked more questions, considered the programs Daniel mentioned. It won't happen again." Marcus nodded solemnly. "I expect not. Effective immediately, your lending decisions will be reviewed by Mr. Patel for a probationary period. If we don't see improvement, we'll reconsider your position here. Additionally, I want our compliance team to work closely with you and the staff to ensure a better system is in place, one that prevents personal bias from influencing professional decisions." Caroline nodded, relief and regret mixed in her eyes. Marcus then turned to Daniel. "Your initiative, honesty, and compassion have not gone unnoticed. I want you to know that I appreciate your efforts. I'd like to see you progress within this organization. Let's have a conversation later about your future here." Daniel's face lit up. "Thank you, Mr. Hale. I only did what I felt was right." Marcus stood. "Right is exactly what we need more of." He met everyone's gaze firmly. "We will not fail our mission. This branch, like all Riverview branches, must truly serve every member of the community." As he left the conference room, followed by Patel and the compliance team, the bank staff remained silent, digesting what had just happened. The man who once walked in wearing a faded hat and modest clothes had revealed himself as their leader. And in doing so, he had sparked the very change that the bank's posters claimed to represent, only this time, it would be real.